Hi, this is Sam Frick. I am the founder and editor at Around the Northeast Corner, covering 30 schools across Northeast Indiana and parts of Elkhart County. That includes the ACAC, the NECC, and the Northeast 8. So I told you that I would be previewing the three area conferences, and we'll begin with previewing the Northeast Corner Conference. It's a little late, so I apologize for that. Unfortunately, with me working as an instructor at a college, there's no way I can do this on time with all the things I deal with on top of freelancing and doing everything by myself with very little help whatsoever. So let's go ahead and kick off with the NECC. And I think with the NECC, at least for girls basketball, we have to divide this into three sections with the conference. We'll begin with the teams that we know are very likely not going to contend the NECC, at least for the 2024-25 season. I would say the most likely of the bunch is probably West Snowball, just because, again, this is year two of a rebuild under Haley Holiday. This program has struggled quite a bit over the past couple years or so. And while West Snowball is starting to gain some talent, they're far from ready from competing for the conference championship in this coming season. They're already 0-2 to begin this season with a 10-point loss to Bethany Christian. Mind you, Bethany is on a rebuild of their own, so this is not the best Bethany Christian team out there, and they lost by 14 points to Blackhawk Christian, although this is an improvement from last season where they fell to Blackhawk by a score of 63-15. So at least there's some marginal improvements for West Snowball from this year compared to last year, but clearly the Chargers are in a rebuild for this season. But when you look at West Snowball, obviously some freshmen come into the fold that are going to help the West Snowball Chargers compete this year. You have Stella Venturi on this team. You look at Addison Burns as a freshman on that team for this year. At least we know her from the volleyball team. She also plays basketball as well as West Snowball. Desperately needs some athletic talent right now at West Snowball. Marlene Mast, another talented Mast kid that's going to shoot the ball pretty well for the West Snowball Chargers. But as you can see, West Snowball is a very small team. And that's one of the things I noticed with the West Snowball Chargers is it's a small team. They're young. I mean, you got Ava DeLons, another freshman that comes to mind for them. You have Reagan Esch, who's a sophomore. Again, lots of young kids on this team for the West Snowball Chargers. Offensively, it has become an issue scoring points so far this year for West Snowball. And the chances of West Snowball being able to find that offense in the near future is very slim, at least for this year, because the NECC is definitely going to see an improvement of quality compared to last year. So I don't think West Snowball is going to be able to maintain that of finding any success of anything at all in this conference and whatnot. If you look at the matchup against Blackhawk Christian, for instance, their leading scorer was Marlene Mast with 12 points. You also have Allison Mercedes with 6 points, and then Taylor Jordan's their big with 2 points. And Taylor Jordan, as great as she is in track and field, Taylor Jordan is not the best basketball player out there. Unfortunately, they're also going to be taking on Columbia City tonight. I know Columbia City lost some really good players off of last season's team, but Columbia City is still Columbia City, and West Snowball is nowhere near the talent of Columbia City. Another team that's most likely not going to compete for the conference championship this year is Lakeland. I know Lakeland improved towards the end of last season, but they still went 4-19 last year. Lakeland, like West Snowball, also a very young team, as the Lakers still looking to continue their rebuild under James Benson. Obviously, they have a nice player in Dulce Canito, but Dulce Canito is just not enough offense whatsoever right now for Lakeland, only averaging 8 points per game, and she's their leading scorer. That's just not enough for Lakeland when you're playing against top-tier teams. Caitlin Ryan, I guess, is an okay player. She can shoot the ball at a decent rate, but not enough volume in terms of shots for me to say that's a sustainable shooting number. Zoe Bowman averages 8 rebounds per game. I guess that's one bright spot for Lakeland is they can rebound the ball decently well for a team that's smaller and kind of guard heavy. Mackenzie Carlson, 3 assists per game as a sophomore. She's a solid player of her own, but isn't going to be the leading scorer at Lakeland just because Carlson primarily is going to be a shooter, just like the other Carlson we talked about, Justin Carlson of the Lakeland Lakers. And unfortunately for Lakeland, they're just not going to be able to find that that sustained level of offense to compete in the NECC this season. And then I would go one other team here. I would go Churubusco. I know Busco returns a lot off of last season, including Bridget Timbrook, who's going to Earlham College, and Brooklyn Sinclair, as well as Patty Wids. But Churubusco clearly is in a rebuild, and under Dawn Koch, who is a rookie varsity head coach. I know she has coaching experience from her days at Carroll, but only at a lower level of basketball, more specifically at the freshman level. Now she's the varsity head coach. Very, very different level of talent competition for Churubusco for her compared to where she was at Carroll. The talent at Busco is just nowhere near the level of Carroll. And you can see it by their results so far. They lost by 35 points to Bishop Dwayner. Probably not the best Dwayner team out there, and probably not the best team in the SAC, and they lost by 25 points to Lakewood Park. Lakewood Park is a pretty good 1A team. Not going to discredit Lakewood Park whatsoever, but I think Churubusco is going to struggle far greater against teams that are bigger with more talent to choose from. Their only wins against Hamilton, 65-9, and Hamilton, well, it's Hamilton. So that's not going to get me all excited about Churubusco, that the fact their only win so far is against a rebuilding Hamilton program. They're also going to be taking on Leo tonight. And I'm going to be quite honest with you, that Leo game might be a long, long game for Churubusco, because they got a long way to go. They're clearly not contenders. And then the second tier, I would put them in kind of the middle tier where they're just, they're not that bad, but they're clearly not a strong contender, but they're far better than the three teams I just mentioned earlier. One of those teams I would put in that midst is Prairie Heights. Prairie Heights, 1-1 in the season. They're going to be a scrappy team. They're going to be a team that's going to fight for rebounds. They're going to be a team that's going to be known for their defense and for its blue-collar play. That's kind of what Prairie Heights has become these days. They're a team that's going to fight for points. They're going to fight for loose balls. And when you have a player, Emily McCrae, who kind of resembles Prairie Heights' mentality as being a tough team to play against, you're going to get that type of mentality. Avery Certain has become a nice rebounder as a freshman, 6.5 rebounds per game. Bailey Gotsey with 2 assists per game. McCrae, 4 steals per game. Defense is going to be the calling card for Prairie Heights. I think one thing you have to like for Prairie Heights is they do finally have some solid players around the rim that can play some defense and could provide some stability inside, which I think was a little bit of an issue at times last year for Prairie Heights. So I think there are some positive things to take from for Prairie Heights. There's that they're scrappy. They're going to play tough defense. But as we know right now, offensively, Prairie Heights is going to have trouble scoring points. Not having Sarah Park. Obviously, she graduated off of last year. She's at St. Francis. Prairie Heights is going to have trouble scoring points at times. And there could be nights where Prairie Heights' offense really becomes a key factor behind some of their losses, just because they don't necessarily have the offensive talent to beat some of these higher level teams. But Prairie Heights will be battle tested, and they're going to be a tough team every single night. The question is, can Prairie Heights score enough points? And I think because of the lack of offense, I think Prairie Heights is not a contender this season in terms of that. But they will certainly be better than just here. They're the bottom of the food chain when it comes to conference contention in the NECC. Another team to kind of put on that second tier is Westview. Westview, I have to think Westview will be better this year. I understand Westview had a down year last year. Things were just kind of unraveling for the Warriors that year. Obviously, Michaela Mess did not play the whole year. She only played at the start of the season, like the first week of the season, and then she transferred to Fairfield. Obviously, we know how that went with Michaela Mess, as she was just playing JV after that at Fairfield. But Westview was a very young team, and the only reason Westview had any chance of competing in the conference was because they had Michaela Mast. Obviously, when you have an extremely young team that Westview had, they had almost no chance of succeeding that season. So now Westview returns a bit back off of last season. Are they going to be a good enough team to compete in the NECC? The answer is going to be no. But Westview should be better because now they have some stability and experience around this team that actually makes them a little more well-rounded than what we have seen in the past. I think Janissa Lehman is going to be a player that's going to have a nice year. She's already averaging 10 points and 5.5 rebounds per game. Bree Corey is going to have a more of a stable role now with Westview because now they have that full offseason of getting this team kind of acclimated to this new style of what Westview is going to be known for. Olivia Bontrager is showing some growth on both ends of the floor. She's got 3.5 steals per game for the Westview Warriors. She needs to get her offense going, but I think right now you have to like her other aspects of the game so far. Bree Corey is going to provide some stability in the post, which I think is huge for a team that doesn't have a lot of very good shooters. You need some size that can score around the rim. And then you got Karis Weinberg. Karis Weinberg is a player that could become a nice, solid shooter on this team if she can be consistent on knocking down her shots. Again, kind of like with Prairie Heights, they're not going to be a high-octane offense. They're going to be kind of a scrappier team than others. They're going to have nights where they're going to struggle, but Westview, I think from a win-loss perspective, should be better this season. But where do you put Westview in that situation? I think that remains to be seen here. And I think those are really I should take that back. There is one other team I would probably put there for this year, and that is Garrett. I would say of the three teams, Garrett is probably the most ready to compete for the conference right now, just because I think when you look at Garrett compared to the other teams, Garrett clearly has the talent to compete in the NECC, and I'm not just saying that just to ride on Garrett's recent success in football and whatnot. I really mean, like, Garrett does have some talent to work with that actually can play some basketball. And I think when you look at a player like Sarah DePew, I think that makes a huge difference for this Garrett team. 2 years ago, Sarah DePew was hardly a varsity player at all. She was barely playing varsity time 2 years ago. She struggled to find her shot. And Sarah DePew just had trouble finding her role her freshman year. Last season, saw substantial growth for Sarah, where she was averaging, 9 points per game. Not 9 points per game. She was averaging around 12 points per game, I should say. Excuse me. Match Preps has the wrong stats. But she was averaging around 12 points per game, and for the first time, really found her spot, found her role for this Garrett team, and really took center stage as a key contributor for this Garrett team. We know what she can bring in volleyball. We know she's a three-sport athlete, so you know her athleticism is going to come and play for her. And I think that's very important when you have a team that's mixed of some young players as well as older players. I think it's very important. You look at a player of Delaney Hitson, she's going to be what she is. She's going to be a solid player in the post. She's going to provide some tough defense. She's going to provide some size around the paint, and she's going to be that player you're going to put as a rim protector. I think you look at another player at Garrett, and that's Rylan Flotow. I apologize if I butchered her name here. She's an interesting player, kind of a plug-in type of basketball player on this team. Again, with Garrett, they're going to be known for being a solid rebounding team. They're going to be a team that's going to be centered around good, cohesive team basketball. They're going to be scrappy. They're going to hope to also be a team that's more responsible taking care of the basketball than they were last year. That was a huge problem with Garrett last year, was they were not the best team in terms of taking care of the basketball, and it did cost them some games because they were, let's just be honest, they just were not very good about taking care of the basketball whatsoever. I think when we look at with Garrett, I think the things to keep an eye on with the Railroaders are going to be the growth and progression of their freshmen. We are fully aware that Garrett's freshman class is pretty strong this season. And we look at Garrett as a whole, and I just want to make sure I have everything correct here. Obviously, we talked about Madison Freeze, Delaney Hitson, the seniors at Garrett, Sarah DePew, a junior, Rylan Floto, a sophomore. You have these freshman kids coming in. You got Emma Kaufman, Ava Seacrest, the two talented freshmen off a team that was pretty good in 8th grade. Pretty good 8th grade team. And they're going to be the key players of whether or not Garrett can improve from their 8-16 campaign. And I think the thing with Garrett is they want to make sure they're a team that's going to be, obviously they're more experienced, but also a team that can also cut down the turnovers and really become a team that can actually be in games. Last year, at times, they were there in games, but the problem was Garrett's offense was kind of they were, how do I put this with their offense? The offense was really the thing that was holding them back from really competing in the NECC. And while I've had my thoughts of John Bodie over the years, and while I don't think John Bodie is as good as some people think he is, John Bodie is a winning basketball coach, and he knows how to coach winning teams. Garrett will be competitive this year, but I think whether or not they can compete for a conference or sectional championship will hinge on the experienced players' growth in basketball, the progression of Sarah Depew as a reliable scorer, and also how quickly can the freshmen adapt to this varsity team. I think those are things that we're going to really be keeping an eye on over the course of this season as Garrett opens their season on the road against Heritage and Woodland. Heritage is tonight. Woodland is on Saturday. And then he would go with the prime contenders. And there's probably about 5 teams that can compete for the NECC this season. So in terms of contentions, one of the first teams I would put in there in terms of contention for the NECC is Central Noble. I would say with Central Noble, they're probably the most unpredictable when it comes to this. Because when you look at Central Noble, they do return quite a bit back. Obviously, you have Abby Plea, who was one of the top 3 or 4 leading scorers off of last year's team. I think she averaged around 13 points per game, or 14 points per game for the Central Noble Cougars. But Abby Plea can have times of being invisible. And whether or not Abby Plea can show more consistency as a reliable all-around scorer and shooter, I think remains to be seen. But when Plea does have consistent basketball performances, and she does finish, Abby can be a pretty good basketball player in this area. I think it's just a matter of taking that next step as a leader of the Central Noble team. So far, I haven't quite seen that just yet, although it's just one game. It's not enough to fully say where Abby Plea is as a player, but she's going to have to be able to dictate the pace of the game, and she's going to have to be the floor general of this Central Noble offense, at least for the time being for this year, because of where Central Noble is transitioning to this younger group coming in, and you have these veterans still around this team for this season. You also have a really solid player at another guard position in Kira Bolin, a player that doesn't get a lot of attention just because the ball doesn't usually go to Kira Bolin's hands all that much compared to Abby Pleat or Grace Swank, or their center. But when you look at Kira Bolin, obviously she's got that quality shooting ability. She can get to the basket, obviously. She has a nice shot. She's a career 34% three-point shooter, so she's going to be a really reliable shooter on the Central Noble team. I wish her free throw numbers were a little better, but that's here and there. She is a player that's also selfless. She's going to be able to share the ball with her teammates and really provides that nice, gritty Central Noble mentality that they're known for over the past few years at Central Noble. And then Grace Swank, as I mentioned earlier, their dominant post player inside for the Cougars. For whatever reason, Grace Swank was quite invisible in that first game against Bishop Lures. That was a bit of a question mark for me. For a player that's so reliable in the post, I just was that surprised that Grace Swank was not as involved on the offense as I would have liked. So that does give me a little bit of question mark as to where Grace Swank is right now for the Central Noble team. Again, just one game in doesn't really tell me a whole lot about this team right now, but I think for Central Noble, their key to success is going to hinge on the progression of Grace Swank as a dominant two-way post player and the consistency of Abby Plea. Because when Grace Swank is at her best, she is one of the best centers in Northeast Indiana without question. She's got, 339 rebounds, career average of 7 rebounds per game, also averaging just under a block per game in her career as well. She averaged 9 points per game last year without playing a full season. I think she only played 19 games last season, and because of that foot injury that she suffered against Whitco, they need Grace Swank for Central Noble to be successful this year. They are not contenders without Grace Swank. That's without question. I look at other players on the Central Noble team, and Coach Malcolm is pretty high on the depth of Central Noble and a team that can be a pretty good defensive team, although They're going to have to be much better than they were against Bishop Luers, because that was a problem against Luers. But you look at Cadence Bales. Bales is okay. I mean, I think she's kind of just a raw prospect right now for Central Noble. She can rebound the basketball. She can rebound the basketball and can score around the rim a little bit, but she's got a lot of work to do right now and be able to become more of a consistent player in terms of an offensive playmaker and whatnot. I think there are some consistency issues right now for her. I think you look at Kenny Weiss. Kenny Weiss at this point, she is what she is. She is known as being a player that's going to be known as a good team player, a kid that's going to attack the basket. She's going to be a tough kid. She's going to rebound the basketball. She's going to play good defense. That's kind of who she is at this point. Obviously, she's had injuries throughout her career that have kind of hinged her offensive development, but still have played a good enough role to help Central Noble to be able to have a successful season. Taylor Custer, I really liked Taylor Custer's first half against Bishop Luers. She had 12 points in the first half against Bishop Luers. She was aggressive. She had poise. She attacked the basket. She was involved on the offense of the ball, showing that wingspan that Central Noble has been hoping for a long time now for the Cougars. The thing with Taylor Custer is again, kind of like with Abby Pleat, it really bodes down to consistency with Abby Pleat. And Taylor Custer. And Taylor in the second half, again, to her defense, I don't think she was the only one that struggled in the second half, but Taylor Custer was not as involved in the second half as she was in the first. And that's the thing with Central Noble that they're going to have to clean up is they got to obviously clean up the turnovers. They got to be much more versatile offensively. They can't be settling on too many threes like they did in the second half against Bishop Luers. They got to be a little more aggressive in attacking the basket, and they were not aggressive in the second half against Bishop Luers at all. Luers was clearly the better team after halftime, and that is something that Central Noble needs to be better if they want to compete for a conference championship, no question. But I think fans got to hope that the first half of Taylor Custer in the Luers game is the Taylor Custer we see for most of the season. Some other things that stand out to me about Central Noble: Megan Carnahan, good player off the bench. Katie Forker is going to bring some nice toughness and skill off the bench as well. But I think the thing I'm really looking at is the progression of Jaylee Sloan, the freshman 5'10" guard. Didn't have a big role offensively in the varsity game against Bishop Luers, but I really liked her JV performance against Bishop Luers. Now, how much we see of Jaylee Sloan this season, it remains to be seen. I just want to see where the younger players are developing. And I think for Central Noble, I don't think this is a year where we're saying, okay, Central Noble is really all in for a conference championship or they're really all in for a sectional championship, because I don't think this team is at the level of, say, where they were 2 years ago when they had senior year Maddie Weiss, senior year Megan Keeble. Everything just kind of clicked at the same time. I don't think we're at that level yet for Central Noble, and I think this year is a learning year for some of the players back at Central Noble. I think this is a year of growth for the returning players, and I just want to see where and how comfortable Jaylee Sloan is getting accustomed to the varsity stage. So I think we're going to see more of Jaylee Sloan as the season progresses. I think she's too talented a player to just be stuck in JV. We're going to see her play a bigger role as we get deeper along into the season. I think it's just going to depend on how fast she grows in terms of developing as a varsity player and how much trust does the coaching staff have in putting Jaylee Sloan in those situations. But I think we're going to see more of Jaylee Sloan as we get deeper into the season. Other teams to watch for conference contention. I think when we talk about conference contention, we have to talk about the Angola Hornets. What's interesting about Angola is now that they just went through the volleyball season where they went to the state finals, this kind of, how do I put this with Angola? It kind of crunches Angola's flexibility in terms of this kind of weird schedule for Angola. They're not going to be playing their first game until November the 20th. So they're going to have quite a long preseason, and some of the players, again with Angola, there's quite a few players that play volleyball that are going to be on the basketball team. How and when do they get their basketball legs back? I think is going to be the key question for Angola. Anytime you have a fall sport that goes on a very deep run in the postseason, you just got to wonder, when do their basketball leads come? When do they come? How long does it take for these kids to transition to basketball? Because playing volleyball and playing basketball is like apples and oranges. They are completely different sports. They require completely different rules, completely different athleticism, completely different performance-based activities. You cannot expect volleyball players to have that same success as basketball players at an immediate rate. So that's where I have a question with Angola. And maybe that's why I don't know if I would put Angola in that realm of they're real contenders for the conference championship, just because I think Angola puts a lot of reliance on these multi-sport athletes. And with the volleyball state run, I think it's going to kind of hurt their chances of winning a conference championship right now. Now, again, they do have talent back, and they have a system now in place where Angola can improvise a pretty strong game plan each night. Angola finally can play some defense. They have a team that can rebound the basketball. They're a team that can provide some balanced scoring when it's done right. But I think with Angola, I think there's a lot of question marks in terms of how they're able to transition from volleyball to basketball, because they have so many players playing on the volleyball team. You just wonder where that transition and how that transition is going to occur. Obviously, the performances of Lexi Stillman and Bailey Holman are going to be critical for the Angola Hornets. Lexi was one of their leading scorers last year. She also was their returning leader in assists with 3.3 assists per game. Bailey Holman, 8.1 points per game, 7.6 rebounds. Very crucial player in the post for the Angola Hornets, as well as her sister, Kendall Holman. Kendall's going to play her first varsity season on the basketball court for the Angola Hornets. So you're going to have two trees in that post for Angola, and Bailey Holman and Kendall Holman, two fiery personalities for this Hornets basketball team. Ava Reinard, again, nice, solid role player for this Hornets team. Carly Gillen, solid athlete, coming off a very good soccer career for the Angola Hornets. Ann McClure, who just finished her senior year on the volleyball team as a libero. McClure is going to have some type of role for Angola. You got Elena Miller. She's going to finally play some varsity basketball. What type of role do we see of her? That remains to be seen there. Aspen Sutton will provide some athleticism as well. Again, the roles for those players, very much unknown right now for the Angola Hornets. But I think the thing we talked about Angola, and it's similar to Central Noble, but I think it's kind of amplified here with the Angola Hornets, is the number of freshmen playing at Angola. So we talked about Garrett with the freshmen. We talked about Central Noble with their freshmen, or at least to a lesser level. Angola is the one team that could be the biggest wild card just because of the number of talented freshmen coming in. I already mentioned Kendall Holman, and you got Stella Stotkamp, really solid all-around guard for Angola, who can handle the basketball, can see the floor well, can play good defense, can shoot the basketball, right? Hadley Pocock, the Pocock girls, the Pocock kids, I should say, have historically been known for being really strong shooters, great eye for the basketball, sees the floor well, can get up and down the floor. And we saw that we saw that at Carroll, we saw that with even on the boys basketball team in Angola. And now you got Hadley Pocock, who is going to have a chance to provide some immediate impact on the varsity team, as well as Ellis Savage. Ellis Savage is probably the most pure scorer on this Angola team. She's the one player that really could have this immediate offensive explosion, depending on how well she's able to adapt to the varsity basketball floor. Now, keep in mind, Ella Savage is also coming off a volleyball season, although did not play. I don't think she played any sets in the playoffs, but Ella Savage was part of that volleyball team that went to the state finals, just like with Kendall Holman. So again, there's going to be a transition period even with some of the freshmen, just because of them playing volleyball as well. And then Addie Weisenauer is another one as well. A lot of names, a lot of athletes. There's a lot of moving parts with Angola that I think for right now leaves us with a lot of questions as to just how good Angola is. Again, what we saw from last year tells us that there is some promise with Angola going 14-10 last season, but you don't have Macy Oberlin, and I think that's a pretty big loss for Angola. Not having Kylie Caswell at point guard leaves a big hole in that point guard position. There's going to be a lot of sorting out things and figuring out which player fits in what position. Trying to find that chemistry is going to be very crucial for this Angola team. They're going to be opening the season with 3 straight home games, all coming within a 3-day span from November 20th through November 23rd when they host Woodland, Eastside, and West Snowball. I believe that Eastside game is the NECC game of the week at around the northeast corner. Some other contenders to watch, and I would say these next 3 teams are probably the most likely teams to contend for the conference championship. First off, I'll go with Fremont. Fremont is coming off a very successful season for the Fremont Eagles, going 16-9, winning a sectional championship against the Central Noble Cougars at Eastside before falling to Lewis Cass by 12 points in the regional championship game. Fremont is off to a very strong start, 2-0 in the season. They defeated South Bend St. Joseph 53-41. That's a 3A school from the NIC, so that's pretty promising there. And then you got an 84-13 win over the Canterbury Cavaliers. Fremont's pretty straightforward. They returned essentially their entire starting 5 back for Fremont. So you know the Eagles are experienced. You know the chemistry is very strong for Fremont. A lot of multi-sport athletes at Fremont, so you know the athleticism is there for the Eagles. When we talk about Fremont, we talk about these players, right? We talk about Grace Charlock, the starting point guard for Fremont. She's averaging roughly 14 points per game for Fremont. Probably their smartest basketball player on the floor for Fremont. Probably the player with the most dynamic impact in terms of her playmaking abilities and seeing the floor and be able to move up and down the floor. I think she's probably the best player in terms of that level of a basketball player for Fremont, and that's why colleges are very excited about the future of Grace Charlock of the Fremont Eagles. Maya Turner is their 2-way player at the forward position, primarily small forward for Fremont. She can shoot the 3, but is going to be a player that's going to be primarily focused on being a player that can score around the rim and be a player that can score through contact. I think it's going to be very important for the Fremont Eagles. She's off to a pretty strong start. I think she had 18 points against St. Joseph, which is pretty impressive considering St. Joseph is a 3A school. I know St. Joseph is not the same St. Joseph team from the past several years, but I would say it's still a pretty solid St. Joseph team that plays some high-level competition. So obviously Fremont's doing something right when you're beating St. Joseph by 12 points. And then you have Addie Parr, by this point, you should know who Addie Parr is. Addie Parr is a multi-sport athlete. She plays 4 sports, for crying out loud. So you know Addie Parr is a really good athlete right there. She's going to be a player that's going to be... She's great. She's more of a gritty player. And Grace Charlotte, a little more finesse. Maya Turner, a little more finesse. Addie Parr is straight up an athlete. And that's not to say Charlotte and Turner aren't athletes. They are very good athletes by their own recollection of talent. But Addie Parr is straight up pure athleticism, pure heart, pure toughness. And that's what Addie Parr banks her success on, is being a hardworking player. And that's why she has a lot of success in volleyball and basketball, in softball, and in track and field. She's one of the hardest working players at Fremont, not just in her athletic competition, but also in the classroom. It's very clear that she is a hardworking kid. And that's what she's known for. And she's already off to a good start. She's averaging 15 points per game. She had 9 rebounds against St. Joseph, which is pretty good. She almost had a double-double in that game against a 3A school. That's pretty good there. I think, to me, the thing with Fremont is the seniors at Fremont are going to be a huge part of how far Fremont can go this year because of that senior pedigree, the success, the leadership, that they know what it takes to win at the next level, to win at the level they need to for Fremont to be successful. Addie Parr and Claire Folk both have found that success there in the past for the Fremont Eagles. Claire Folk, obviously not the same level of basketball talent as an Addie Parr or a Grace Charlotte or a Maya Turner, but Claire Folk is a very good athlete herself. Obviously, she's more of a volleyball talent, which is why she is going to be going to St. Francis next year. It's because she is one heck of a setter from the volleyball team. But she's still going to have a role for the basketball team and still will play a pretty solid role for Fremont. Obviously not at the level of volleyball statistically, but from a leadership standpoint, will have an equal impact for the Fremont Eagles. Again, even Claire Folk, still going to be a very important player for Fremont just because of that senior leadership. And even some athleticism is going to be very important for a Fremont team that is a 1A school. They have to have multi-sport athletes just because the numbers at Fremont are just not at the level of most of the NECC schools. And let's not forget, Braylee Moss has had a respectable career for Fremont, and I think she can do even more this coming season as kind of that scrappy, gritty senior guard for Fremont. Going to attack the basket. She's going to be a selfless guard for this team. She's going to be a kid that's going to fight for loose balls, going to fight for those rebounds, and that's what Braylee Moss's role is she's going to be that gritty guard on that Fremont team. Chloe Verdon will be another one to watch to see how much she grows this coming year for Fremont. And I think it's also worthy to note the role of Haley Heller is going to be huge as well. This is the first time we're going to really be seeing Haley Heller on a consistent basis this year. She's primarily been a JV player up to this point. She's off to a pretty good start. She had 18 points against Canterbury. Now keep in mind, it is Canterbury of 2024, not the Canterbury from 10 years ago. So Canterbury is kind of, let's just say they're bad. So, but still, either way, Haley Heller is doing well as well for this Fremont team. And to see whether Haley Heller can continue that success this year, I think she's probably the biggest wild card for Fremont. The more players that can provide success for this team, the better chance of Fremont to compete in the NECC, and Shea Thomas hopes that Fremont can be seen as a legitimate conference contender. They should be right up there in that conference contention. You look at Fairfield, they've won the conference the past 2 years in the regular season, and so far 1-1 the season to begin the season under Kyle Hartman. They were 21-4 last year for the Fairfield Falcons. 22-4 last year for Fairfield before falling to Northwood in the sectional championship game. They came up just short of winning the NECC tournament. They just beat Elkhart about a week ago, 40-39. That's a solid win for Fairfield. They did lose to John Glenn by 23 points. But John Glenn is off to a very good start. They are actually dominating so far. 2-0 start, but they've won both of their games by over 20 points. So I would say right now for Fairfield, I don't think that's a bad loss for the Falcons. I don't think that tells me anything about Fairfield as a team because John Glenn is just that good of a basketball team. I think the game against Elkhart tells me more about Fairfield than it does with the John Glenn game. I think John Glenn is just a measuring stick game for the Falcons. But when you look at Fairfield, I think we know what they're going to be with Fairfield. They're not going to be a high-scoring team. That's not what Fairfield's known for recently. Fairfield's going to be a team that's going to primarily be focused on their defense, a team that's going to defend the rim, going to play some strong zone defense. They're going to be a team that primarily focuses on being a team that can rebound the basketball, a team that can play scrappy, gritty, tough defense, and their size in the post is going to be a very big part of Fairfield's success. Obviously, the addition of Michaela Mass on the varsity team is going to have a significant impact on this Fairfield team because now with Fairfield, they have somebody that they can go to provide that offense, not only behind the three-point arc, which I think she's a very good three-point shooter, but also be able to score in three levels of the basketball floor, be able to score the post, be able to score in the mid-range, and be able to score in the three-point, as well as be able to be a reliable ball handler. Those are things that are very important for a kid like Michaela Mass who can play three positions for the Fairfield Falcons. And Fairfield struggles to find those type of players to play multiple type of positions just because the number of kids being at Fairfield is pretty limited compared to schools like Angola and Garrett. And even at the level of, say, the DeKalb East Noble, those numbers are just not quite there for Fairfield. But having a player like Michaela Mass is huge. Eva Herber, obviously a really strong two-way player in that shooting guard position. She can be a kid that can knock down threes. She's a kid that can attack the basket. She's a kid that can find players. She's just an all-around really good basketball player for this Fairfield team, and I think Eva Herbert is only going to get better this season for Fairfield. I think you look at Hattie Herbert, again, a little more of grit with Hattie Herbert, but she's going to provide some size. She's going to be able to get to the basket and be able to be a presence inside. Obviously, the Madison Jones is going to be the name we're going to keep talking about with Fairfield just because we're talking about a 5'11", power forward, maybe even a center even. a kid that can average a double-double per game at some point in her career. And I think Madison Jones, when healthy, is going to be that big-time impact in the basket that not only can force teams to have to gamble a little bit defensively, but also putting teams in some very difficult situations in terms of fouls, in terms of being able to manage the game clock, in terms of being able to figure out how to be able to find some consistent defensive stops. Because not only do you have to worry about Madison Jones in the post and be able to control the boards, now you have to worry about Michaela Mass. You have to respect her range as a versatile shooter and a scorer, and you got to worry about a player like Eva Herbert, who can improve her game to become a better offensive player as well. So teams are going to have a lot of trouble be able to find that balance of being able to win the battle in the glass and still be able to respect the three. So keeping defenses honest is going to be a challenge this year, just because Fairfield can provide that balance. But I think when we talked about the NECC, I don't think it's that difficult to say that Eastside is probably the favorite to win the conference this year. Now, Eastside came up just short of winning the regular season championship. They only lost to Fairfield by, a couple points. I think it was like 47-50. Yeah, 50-47 at the hands of Fairfield. That was just before the conference tournament began. Obviously, Eastside's got to figure out how to beat Fairfield consistently. I think that's going to be the key thing for Eastside. But I think when we look at with Eastside, I think the one thing Eastside has going for them is obviously they return essentially most of their starting five. I think that's very important for a team like Eastside that relies very heavily on their guards, a team that relies very heavily on playing a very, very physical press defense, a team that's going to press all three zones and be able to play at a high level of physicality and a high level of energy, high level of speed that Eastside's known for. That's very important to have experienced players that can play a variety of different roles, a variety of different positions. I think those are things that are very important for a team like Eastside that relies on the guard play of Paige Tratzler and Sydney Kessler, because they're so important to this team. Tratzler was their second leading scorer last year, averaging 11 points per game. She was also their leader in assists. I think she averaged about 2 assists per game, I think it was. And then steals-wise, she was their best defender from the backcourt. Tratzler averaged about 3 or 4 steals per game last year for the Eastside Blazers, which is why Paige Tratzler is such a key player to Eastside, not just because of her offense, but because of her defense. Obviously, with Paige Tratzler, she's going to be a solid shooter. She's a kid that can also play that kind of tough-nosed, dog-like mentality that can attack the basket through contact. But Tratzler's game really is about her defense. That's where Paige Tratzler gets her name from, is from being a dog on the defensive side of the floor, and that's why she's getting quite a bit of interest to play the next level, just because of just her resounding defense, her awareness on the floor, and being able to be an impactful player regardless of the stats. That's important for a team like Eastside that relies heavily on their team chemistry and relying very heavily on being aggressive, but also playing team basketball. You look at a kid like Sydney Kessler, who really took off last year, becoming a very, very important player as that third wheel of the Eastside offense, as a clutch shooter, a kid that can get to the basket, a kid that plays to the mark, that wins those 50-50 battles, that can score in a variety of different ways, can provide knockdown key free throws for the Eastside Blazers, can play some stifling defense, a kid that it's basically a kid that's been raised by a winning family, right? In the kitchen family, a kid that knows what it takes to win. And that's the type of players that always gets colleges excited, is which type of players are winning players. The type of players that no matter what the situation is, they're going to find a way to compete at the highest level and win. That's where Sydney Kessler thrives. And I think you look at a player like Lily Kresher, just like the Kreschers in the past, known for being versatile defenders, rebound the basketball, going to be a kid that's going to give you a variety of different ways that you have to defend Lily Kresher. You have to defend her in the post. You have to defend her in the mid-range. You have to foul her. You have to defend her in the perimeter, because she can do a little bit of everything. Obviously, when you're a kid that's averaging 11.8 points per game, 7 rebounds, she's got a block per game. You're talking about a player that is active in all facets of the game and is such a difficult player to contain because again, kind of like with Fremont to an extent and then Fairfield to a much greater extent, you have to be honest when you're trying to defend this Eastside team. You know that Eastside's quick. You know you can't let them have free entrances to penetrate the basket. But at the same time, if you're not careful, if they get hot from three, it becomes a dangerous game of cat and mouse with Eastside because you have to limit their ability to attack the basket from the baseline, but you also cannot give them entrance to the middle of the basket, around that paint and the free throw line, and you got to make sure you limit their looks from the perimeter because of what Eastside can do with their speed, with their athleticism, their aggression, their aggressive mentality that Eastside is known for, and on top of all that, if you're not careful taking care of the basketball, Eastside is really good at scoring in transition. They probably are the best transition scoring team in the entire conference. And that's why everybody thinks Eastside is the favorite to win the NECC regular season and maybe even winning the tournament altogether because of the balance of senior leadership, the balance of team depth, their ability to shoot the basketball, the ability to rebound the basketball, even with their sometimes lack of size in a variety of different positions, but also playing that really aggressive press defense. That's what Eastside's known for, and you would have to expect that to continue this season, which is why overall I think Eastside will probably be the favorites to win the conference, and I project Eastside to win the conference as well. As you'll see on the screen, this is how I see the NECC from first place on the top to 11th places on the bottom. It feels weird not seeing Hamilton in the conference anymore, but nevertheless, I have Eastside win the conference with Fairfield, Fremont, Angola, Central Noble all in the midst for a conference championship. Should be a very good year for the NECC.